Hey folks, Matt Easton here, Scholar Gladiatore. So we've got something a little bit different for you today, and that is looking at the management or handling of a long pole weapon. We're going to be looking at it both in conjunction with a shield. I'm using a Norman period shield here, and also use two-handed by itself. Now, this is something we don't look at very often on this channel, but actually if you think about it, it's something that's incredibly important because these are the main weapon sets for most of the Middle Ages and the entirety pretty much of the ancient world period. So most civilizations throughout history have used this combination, a long spear and a shield of some kind. Obviously this is a Norman shield, but it could be a boss-gripped anglo-saxon shield, it could be a Roman shield or whatever. So in fact this is an incredibly important weapon set to pay some attention to and have a little look at how these things were handled. Specifically what I'm looking at in this video, and we'll look at other videos looking at other aspects of how these weapons are handled together. But specifically what I want to look at here is how you change grips. What do I mean by that? Well, obviously if you're using it one-handed or two-handed you have different grips there, but for a start, if we're using it with a shield, predominantly there are two ways of gripping the spear. Okay? First of all, there is an underarm position, and secondly, there is an overarm position. Now you'll see I changed grip in one particular way there, and then another way there. But this is actually really important because you want to be able to switch between the two. There are some scenarios where obviously you're going to be wanting to use the spear predominantly from an underarm position, and there are some scenarios where you're going to be wanting to use it from an overarm position. Now, I have talked about the relative merits of these two grips previously, and most people have noted, certainly most people in the modern world find the underarm far less tiring, far more convenient, in some ways quicker, and some ways even longer, easier to have a longer reach with it as well than the overarm position. I've kind of argued against that to a certain extent on a couple of points. First of all, if we look at the historical record, if you actually look at the historical sources in terms of the iconography, the artwork that we have from the period, the majority of artwork shows spears gripped like this. Now I think the two predominant reasons why that should be the case are, number one, because if you're packed into mass formations, it's actually easier to use spears like this where they're over your heads, over the heads of the people behind you and next to you, instead of if you're using it underarm here, the back end of your spear is going to be restricted and conflicting with the people next to you and behind you, which isn't what you want, obviously, if you want to be able to manage your weapon effectively. So that's one reason why overarm grip was predominantly used. The other reason is because it enables you to immediately throw the weapon if you need to. I'm not going to throw this one because I want to keep it in hand for what I'm talking about, but as you can see, you're ready in a throwing position, and that's not only literally so you can throw it, it's also so you have the threat of a throw. Now, I've spoken about this before, and it really changes the nature of the fight if you know that at any given moment the person you're facing in front of you, or there might be multiple people in front of you, at any given moment they can launch their weapon at you. It means you have to keep your shield up, you have to keep yourself covered in a way and from a distance that's very much more pressing and intimidating than just if you know that they can only stab you at reach of the weapon. So if you know that at 20 feet away this person might see there's an opening over there, that person's not covering themselves with their shield, and you can lob a spear and maybe take a spare spear from someone further back in the line, then that's a very intimidating thing, and it really changes the nature of the fight and means that you have to be a lot more cagey and a lot more cautious, shall we say, in the combat if you know that weapons can be thrown at any given moment. Finally, I'd also add that the overarm grip, as we've looked at before, has some advantages in coming over the opponent's shields and over the shield line. If you're fighting in a shield wall, then it can be very useful at if you're coming shield to shield against your opponents and actually stabbing over the top of their shields. If you're using the spear down here, it's partly blocked by your own shield and of course it's blocked by your opponent's shields anyway. So in terms of actually wounding your opponents, despite the fact that if you're not facing anybody, if you're just holding a spear in an open space like I am at the moment, this might feel more comfortable and you can reach further. If that line of attack is pretty much always blocked by an attacker's shield, well then you have to try something else, and this might become more practical. So how do you change between those two positions? Well, I've already shown some ways there. In fact, there's a number of ways of doing it, but they all have different strengths and weaknesses. So, as you will have noticed, one way of doing it is to basically launch the weapon into the air and change the grip. Okay? You can do that from high to low or low to high. I find it easier to do it from low to high. Okay? Because obviously as it's travelling upwards, it's going against gravity, and therefore it's decelerating as it goes up. If you do it from high to low, it's accelerating as it goes down towards the ground. So there is obviously a risk, inherent risk in doing that. You may miss what you're grabbing there, okay? So you may intend to do this and you may fumble it and hit yourself on the head or drop the weapon or whatever. So that's the danger always of letting go of the thing, is you might mess up. There are other ways of doing it that require more space. Okay, so for example, if you had enough space, if you were just fighting one-on-one, there are ways that you can turn the weapon like this, okay, to change grip like that. There's actually a tree above me here. This, incidentally, is a 2.75 metre or 9 foot spear. Usually on this channel, and on most people's channels in fairness, anyone who deals with pole weapons, you'll see shorter pole weapons used, things like pole axes and halberds. This is more equivalent to the sort of length spear that was actually used in warfare for most of the ancient and medieval periods. But coming back to that, you can turn the weapon around like this to change grip, okay? But the problem is, there's no realistic way you could do that if you've got people standing around you or behind you. Equally, you wouldn't want to be doing this in a combat situation. That is a little bit quicker, although a little bit riskier. So there are some other possible ways you could change grip. Okay, one of them is to support the weapon temporarily on your shield or even in your left hand. Okay, so you can bring it up here and change grip. But I have to say, that's pretty awkward. It might be very safe, but it's very slow and very awkward. Another possible way might be to actually rest it on the ground for a minute. Okay, so again, that might be safer, but it's not very convenient with a long spear. And the problem is you're taking your weapon offline. You're taking your point offline. So, you know, I'm kind of of the view that actually throwing the weapon or momentarily letting go of the weapon up or down is probably the quickest way to change grip in a close-in situation. But as mentioned, it does have some inherent risks. It's not a very easy thing with a weapon that's this long to actually change grip from underarm to overarm without in some way letting go of the weapon. Bearing in mind, you're having to keep your shield up here protecting yourself the whole time. Okay? Maybe, yes, you can do it involving the shield and the spare hand here, but to be honest, it's a bit slow and a bit awkward. So my preferred method is to actually do this or this. Okay? And yes, it has an inherent risk. Yes, you could drop the weapon, but it is quicker. So as with all things, there's a trade-off. Sometimes what is safer is slower, and you have to decide which of those you prefer. But by all means, give me your ideas. What ways do you change from an underarm grip to an overarm grip as quickly and safely as possible? I'll be interested to hear. Let's have a look at the two-handed grip spear now and dispense with the shield. So once we've got the spear in two hands, it becomes a very much more nimble and manoeuvrable weapon, okay, because obviously we've got two hands on the thing, and this is the way that spears in later centuries where body armour was more prevalent, shields were less necessary, would have been often used. So, you know, pikes, half pikes. If we go into the kind of 14th and 15th and 16th centuries, pole arms very often, not always, but very often were used without shields. But if we're going back to antiquity or the migration era or the Viking era, they were not used very often without a shield. Why is that? Well, quite simply, shields offer an enormous amount of protection, especially if you don't have very much body armour, against missile weapons, in a shield wall, against other people's weapons in general, but particularly against missile weapons as well. If I've got no shield, I'm now very, very vulnerable to arrows, crossbows, slings, this kind of thing. Okay, but let's assume, for whatever reason, I am using the spear two-handed. There are a couple of ways of changing grips and specifically changing side. Okay, so generally speaking, spears tend to be used left hand forward. Okay, if you have a thrust-centric polearm, it tends to be used with the left hand in front, left hand leading. That would incidentally be the same as if it was a rifle and a bayonet. Okay, so left hand lead is natural and normal for right-handed people when thrusting. If you've got a cut and thrust pole weapon, so a weapon that chops or strikes, it becomes more natural to have a right hand lead if you're right-handed. These are just kind of basic body mechanics things that seem to be the case for most people. Not everybody's the same, but most people are. So most people, if they're going to strike, want to strike with the right hand at the top. Most people who are going to poke want to do it with the left hand at the top. Okay. That being said, there are many, many reasons why, even with a spear that you're pretty much only thrusting with, you might want to change which side the weapon is on. It could be because your opponent's got a shield. It could be because they're around the edge of an obstacle, like a wall or a fence. Okay, and you might be able to get around it that way. But if they're on the other side, then you might be able to get around it that way. Okay. It might be because they're holding their weapon on a particular side and you want to take advantage of that. There are many, many reasons. But how do you change side of the weapon? Well, fundamentally, there are a few ways of doing it. The simplest way, I would say, so assuming let's start left hand forward. Okay. So the simplest way, but it does come with a drawback that I'll show in a second. The simplest way is actually I'll do it at an angle so you can see, is to slide forward to there, change hand which is in front, and then bring it back. And notice I change foot as well. Generally speaking, if I've got the weapon on the right hand side of my body, I'll be left foot forward. If I've got the weapon on the left hand side of my body, I'll be right foot forward. Okay, so simply you slide the back hand up to the level with the front hand, and then you move it in front and slide back. Okay, so up, down, down. Quite nice and simple. And the advantage of this is it keeps the weapon on line with the opponent, and even puts the changing of hands into a sort of threat as well. There's a thrust in there. You thrust and back, thrust, back. Okay, so it's quite nice and clean and simple. Make sure that you have a splinter-free and smooth shaft for this, otherwise you're going to get an ouchie in your hand. So the drawback, or not the drawback, but should we say the risk of this is that if you don't let enough of the back of the weapon go in front, okay, it has to be able to come across your body here such that you can bring it back down the other side. Okay. If you leave too much sticking out at the back, and I'll demonstrate, I'll do it wrong so you can see, it locks against your body. Okay, so as you come up here, you can't get it past your body. So you have to make sure that you leave a short enough length at the butt, at the back end of the spear, such that you can get it past the body and then back round the other side. One way you can do that to make it safer is actually, when you're just about to do it, slide your backhand to the butt, push the butt forward, and then bring it back the other side. So you're actually measuring with your hand and with feel without needing to look. You know where the butt is, you reach to the butt, push forward, slide back. Okay, right, there are other ways of doing it. One way, for example, would be to bring the point offline and up, switch over here and down there. Now, with a spear, this is generally a bad idea, because you want to keep your point forward and threatening. As soon as you bring the point offline, you're now vulnerable to the opponent charging in, grabbing the shaft, or just attacking, giving a thrust at me. Could I defend it? Yes, possibly. I could knock the thing offside, whichever side it comes. However, as soon as I raise my point up, I'm vulnerable to an attack in that moment. Okay? That being said, you might be using a weapon that can cut and thrust. So you might be using a hewing spear or a partisan or a glaive. If you're doing that, then when you do this, the threat is not gone, okay? Because whilst you're doing this and changing over hand here, changing over which side you're on, it's actually very similar to what I showed previously, but you're doing it in front of the body, okay? If you've got a cutting weapon, as you do this, your threat's still there, because as you're changing at any moment, you can cut down with a cut, okay? So it is okay to bring the point offline if you have the threat of a cut, if it's a halberd or a bill or something like that, if you're able to threaten with a blow, in other words. There are some other ways of doing it that are probably more flamboyant and less efficient and less safe, should we say. So for example, one of those ways would be actually to switch around like this, okay? So let's look at that again. In this case, what we're essentially doing is it's like we're bringing a blow over with the butt, okay? So this, you might do this, for example, if someone knocked your weapon offside. So if they pushed it to the side there, you might knock their weapon offside with yours and then switch around to this side. Now that's quite a fun movement to do, and it probably looks quite nifty, okay? Round here, round there, bam, I've changed sides. Okay, you can do the same thing here, round to that side, bam. There, 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 there. Okay, the problem is it's very wide spaced and it's relatively slow. So it's not a particularly efficient way to change which side of your body the weapon is on, but sometimes, as I've just explained, you might want to do a motion like this because of something else that's going on in the fight, okay? And you can, in fairness, threaten an attack, especially if you have anything at the butt end, or even if you're just striking like it's a quarterstaff. For example, if you thrust at someone and they knock your point to the side, or defend, parry, okay, here, you could threaten with the butt as you come round to the other side and then immediately come in with another thrust. Right, one thing I'm going to mention before finishing is that if you have the weapon in one hand, notice my thumb up is towards the point end, you can change your grip on the weapon by what I would call twirling, okay? So it's a bit like what baton twirlers would do. So you can roll it over the back of the hand there, okay, let's look at that again. So, over the back of the hand, and I'm back to thumb up, okay? You can roll it around the thumb. I'm now thumb towards the butt, okay? Let's look at that again. So, over the thumb, I'm now thumb towards the point. You can use these sorts of things with a shield as well, okay? Let's just pick up the shield again. So these can be used with the weapon alone or with a shield. Let's go here. So I can turn the weapon around that way and I've still got hold of it. So you can roll it over the back of the hand. Notice I'm not actually changing grip in this case, okay? But it can be a useful motion to know that you can do that. You could do it this way as well, but it's more like to drop on your head. There we go, just managed to catch it. That is a pretty risky way of moving the weapon around. And you'll notice it's very wide spaced. It's why I didn't show this or advise this. In terms of rolling over the thumb, okay, so I'm point up towards the top of the spear here. You can do that like this, and I've changed now to point over. So you can turn it around in the hand like this, such that you can change the grip either around the thumb or around the back of the hand, okay? But you'll notice, whilst these motions are relatively safe one-on-one, okay, they're quite wide-spaced. And that's why I wouldn't advise them if you're fighting in groups, because if you need to change from point down to point up, you'll notice it starts to become, when you try and do it in a narrow-spaced way, so if I do it in a wide-spaced way, whoop, there we go, okay, then that's fine. But if I try and do it in a narrow-spaced way, it basically ends up very similar to what I was doing before, but you just maintain a little bit more contact. You really don't want to be turning the weapon around in this wide-spaced way, either vertically or horizontally, when you've got lots of people standing around you. Anyway, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. I'm not specialised in polearm and shield or stuff. I do quite a bit of polearm by itself. But it is a problematic question. What is the safest and also most effective and quickest way of switching from a point, rather an underarm grip to an overarm grip with minimum risk to losing your weapon? I think if we ditch the shield, the way of managing the weapon in terms of switching over when you're using it two-handed are a little bit more clear-cut and a little bit more simple, and they're also well documented, of course, because we have plenty of sources from the later periods when polearms were used by themselves. We don't have much source material for when polearms were used predominantly with shields. Anyway, I hope that's been interesting. Share your thoughts, give us a like and a subscribe. I'd be very interested to hear from people who regularly use polearms with shields, if you have any more insight to bring to this topic. And I think I just want to reiterate, this particularly used with the shield is a very important thing to look at if you're interested in historical European combat, because of course they were the most common and prevalent weapon set throughout ancient and medieval history. And these long spears really were historically used probably more than the shorter spears than we tend to use in a HEMA kind of context, or what you'll mostly see online. So actually managing these much longer weapons is quite an important thing to be looking at. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon for another video. Cheers, folks. Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers, folks.